need police at gate 14. A flight attendant is hurting my mom." Those were the words that came from the trembling lips of a 10-year-old black girl named Lily, standing in the first-class cabin of Flight 447 with her phone clutched in her small hands. Her purple backpack covered in space pins hung from her shoulders as chaos erupted around her. Passengers were pulling out their phones, recording everything. A flight attendant, Bridget Carmichael, 42 years old with bleached blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun and lips pursed in fury, was lunging toward the child screaming, "Put that phone down right now." Behind Lily, sitting quietly in seat 2A, was her mother. Dr. Vivienne Cross, 38 years old, wearing dark sunglasses and an elegant navy blazer, her white cane resting against the seat beside her. Her face was stoic, composed, but if you looked closely, you could see her jaw clenched tight, her hands gripping the armrest with a tension that spoke of barely contained emotion. But how did it get to this? How did a simple flight turn into a mother being humiliated and her daughter having to call the police? Let's rewind 6 hours and I'll tell you a story that will make your blood boil and your heart break before it fills you with hope. It started at Los Angeles International Airport. The terminal was buzzing with the usual chaos of travelers rushing to gates, dragging suitcases, balancing coffee cups and boarding passes. Among them were Lily and her mother Vivienne, making their way toward Gate 14 to board Flight 447 to New York City. They weren't in a rush. Vivienne moved with practiced grace, her white cane sweeping gently in front of her while Lily walked beside her, their routine so synchronized it looked like a carefully choreographed dance. Lily wasn't your average 10-year-old. She was intelligent beyond her years, the kind of child who read astronomy books for fun and could explain the life cycle of stars with the enthusiasm most kids reserved for video games. She was protective of her mother, fiercely so, but not because Vivienne needed protecting in the way people might assume. Vivienne Cross was one of the most formidable women you'd never heard of, and that's exactly how she liked it. You see, Dr. Vivienne Cross was the founder and CEO of CrossTech Innovations, an AI accessibility technology company worth $2.3 billion. Let me say that again. $2.3 billion. She had built an empire creating technology that helped blind and visually impaired people navigate a world that wasn't designed for them. Screen readers that actually understood context. Navigation apps that could describe environments in real time. AI assistants that could identify objects, read emotions, even help people pick out clothes that matched. But here's the part that makes Vivienne's story even more remarkable. She hadn't always been blind. At 28 years old, she was a rising software engineer at a major tech company, engaged to be married, planning her future. Then she was diagnosed with a rare degenerative condition that slowly stole her sight over the course of 18 months. She watched the world fade to shadows, then to shapes, then to nothing but darkness. Her fiancé left. He said he couldn't handle it. Her company offered her a settlement and suggested she might be happier pursuing other opportunities. Everyone expected her to retreat, to accept a quieter life, to let her dreams die with her vision. Instead, Vivienne did something extraordinary. She learned to code using screen readers. She taught herself to navigate using echolocation and a white cane. She studied everything she could about assistive technology and realized it was decades behind where it should be. And then, with $50,000 she'd saved and a determination that bordered on obsession, she founded CrossTech in her tiny apartment. 10 years later, her technology was used by millions of people worldwide. She'd been featured in Forbes, Time magazine, and TechCrunch. She'd spoken at conferences across the globe. And in just a few hours, she would be accepting a United Nations Humanitarian Award for her work in accessibility innovation. But if you met Vivienne Cross at an airport, you'd never know any of this. She didn't wear expensive jewelry or designer clothes. She didn't name drop or flash her wealth. She was soft-spoken, humble, the kind of person who thanked the barista 3 times and always said please. She never mentioned her company unless asked. She never used her status as a shield. And Lily had learned from her mother that true strength didn't need to announce itself. As they waited at the gate, Lily suddenly tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, you have to see this sunset." Vivienne smiled softly. "Tell me about it, baby." Lily pressed closer to the massive terminal windows, her voice dropping to that reverent whisper children use when they witness something beautiful. "It's like the sky is on fire, but in a good way. There's this deep orange that's so bright it almost hurts to look at, and it's melting into pink like strawberry ice cream. And at the very top, the blue is still hanging on, but it's got purple edges like it knows it's about to lose." Vivienne tilted her head toward the window, toward the warmth she could feel on her face. "Are there clouds?" "Just a few. They look like they've been dipped in gold." "That sounds perfect." It was a moment of pure tenderness between a mother and daughter who had learned to see the world together in their own unique way. Lily had been describing things to her mother since she was 5 years old, and she'd gotten so good at it that Vivienne sometimes said she could see more through Lily's words than she ever had with her own eyes. The boarding announcement crackled over the intercom. First class and premium passengers were welcome to board. Lily pulled out their boarding passes, 2 tickets for seats 2A and 2B first class, purchased months ago when Vivienne received the invitation to accept her UN award. They made their way down the jetway, Lily guiding her mother with practiced ease. When they reached the aircraft door, they were greeted by Bridget Carmichael, the senior flight attendant. Bridget was 42, with bleached blonde hair pulled back so tightly in a bun it seemed to stretch her face. She had the kind of smile that flight attendants perfect over years of service, wide and welcoming, the kind that says, "I'm here to make your flight comfortable," even when they're exhausted and dealing with their 100th difficult passenger of the week. She smiled at the businessman in front of them. She smiled at the elderly couple behind them. But when Vivienne stepped forward with her white cane and Lily beside her, that smile didn't just fade. It vanished completely, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably close to disgust. Bridget's eyes traveled from Vivienne's dark sunglasses down to her white cane, then over to Lily, and something shifted in her expression. Her lips pressed together. Her shoulders stiffened. And when she spoke, her voice had lost all its warmth. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake. Let me see your boarding passes." Lily, proud and excited for their trip, held them out with a big smile. "We're in 2A and 2B. Bridget took the boarding passes and examined them like they were forgeries. She held them up to the light. She looked at the names, then at Vivienne, then back at the passes. She turned them over as if expecting to find some evidence of tampering on the back. "These are first-class seats," Bridget said slowly, suspicion dripping from every word. "Are you sure you didn't mean to book economy?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Other passengers were boarding now, slowing down as they sensed tension, their eyes darting between the flight attendant and this blind woman with her young daughter. Vivienne's voice remained calm, the kind of calm that comes from years of dealing with people's assumptions and prejudices. "No mistake. Those are our assigned seats." But Bridget wasn't backing down. If anything, she was getting louder, making sure everyone around them could hear. "I'll need to verify this with the gate agent. Please step aside. Step aside. Move out of the way. Let the real first-class passengers board." Lily felt her mother's hand tighten around hers. She looked up at Vivienne's face and saw something she'd only seen a handful of times in her life. Her mother's jaw was set, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was angry, but she was controlling it, swallowing it down like bitter medicine because she'd learned that showing anger when you're a black woman just makes things worse. Other passengers were staring now. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked curious. Some looked away, not wanting to get involved. Lily felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and something else, something hotter and sharper. Indignation. Her mother had done nothing wrong. They had every right to be there. So why was this woman treating them like criminals? Just then, a man in a pilot's uniform walked past. Trevor Walsh, the co-pilot, 33 years old with kind eyes and an easy smile. He noticed the tension immediately. "Everything all right here?" Bridget's demeanor changed instantly. Her voice went sugary sweet, her smile snapping back into place like a mask. "Just a ticketing issue, Trevor. I've got it handled." Trevor hesitated, his eyes moving from Bridget to Vivienne and Lily. He could sense something was off, but he was due in the cockpit. He gave a small nod and continued forward, throwing one last glance over his shoulder. Bridget disappeared for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 3 minutes. 3 minutes of standing in the jetway while passengers squeezed past them, some muttering apologies, others just annoyed at the delay. 3 minutes of Lily feeling her mother's hand trembling slightly in hers, the only sign that Vivienne was affected at all. When Bridget returned, her face was tight with barely concealed irritation. "Fine. You can sit. But if there's any disruption..." She let the threat hang unfinished in the air. They made their way to seats 2A and 2B. Lily helped her mother get settled, folding her white cane and stowing it carefully, making sure Vivienne's small electronic screen reader device was in the seat pocket where she could easily reach it. Around them, first-class passengers were getting comfortable, accepting champagne and warm towels, chatting quietly about business deals and vacation plans. If you're watching this and you're as angry as I am right now, hit that subscribe button because this story is just getting started, and you're going to want to see how this ends. But here's what I want to know from you. Have you or someone you love ever been treated like you didn't belong somewhere because of how you look or a disability you have? Drop your story in the comments because I have a feeling we're not alone in this. Lily sat down next to her mother and tried to shake off the uncomfortable feeling that had settled in her chest. Her mom was here to accept an award for making the world better for people like her. They had first-class tickets they'd paid for with their own money. They had every right to be on this plane. But as she buckled her seatbelt and felt the aircraft door close with that final, definitive thunk, Lily had no idea that the humiliation had only just begun. And before this flight was over, she would have to become braver than she'd ever been in her entire life. What happened next would test a 10-year-old girl's courage and a mother's dignity in ways that no one should ever have to endure. The plane had reached cruising altitude, and the cabin had settled into that familiar hum of a long flight. Passengers were opening laptops, pulling out books, adjusting their seats. In 2A and 2B, Lily and Vivienne were trying to do the same, trying to shake off the uncomfortable boarding experience and focus on the exciting reason for their trip. The UN Humanitarian Award Ceremony. A celebration of Vivienne's life's work. They should have been relaxed, maybe even a little excited. But that's not what happened. About 20 minutes into the flight, Bridget Carmichael emerged from the galley pushing the beverage cart, that rolling symbol of first-class luxury. The sound of glass clinking, ice rattling, champagne bottles nestled in their buckets. She moved down the aisle with that practiced flight attendant grace, her smile back in place for the passengers who mattered. She stopped at the seat across the aisle from Vivienne and Lily. Walter Finch sat there, a man in his 60s with silver hair, wearing an expensive business suit, reading the Wall Street Journal. Bridget's voice was warm honey. For you, Mr. Finch? Perhaps some champagne to start? Walter glanced up and nodded. That would be lovely, thank you. Bridget poured the champagne into a real glass flute, the kind that caught the light, placed it on a napkin and set it on his tray table with a smile. Then she turned to the passenger behind him. And for you, sir? Lily watched as Bridget served the man behind Walter, then the woman across from him, then the couple 2 rows back. The cart was right there, inches from where Lily and Vivienne sat. But Bridget acted as if they were invisible. She didn't make eye contact. She didn't acknowledge their presence. She just kept serving everyone around them like they were empty seats. Lily waited, thinking maybe Bridget was working her way through the cabin in some order that made sense. But after watching her mother sit there being ignored, after seeing passenger after passenger get their drinks while they got nothing, Lily spoke up. Her voice was polite, the way Vivienne had always taught her to be. Excuse me, could my mom have some water? Bridget barely glanced at them. Her voice was flat, dismissive, the warmth she'd used with Walter Finch completely gone. I'll get to you when I get to you. And then she moved on. She served 5 more passengers. 5. Lily counted them. A businessman with a scotch. A young woman with a mimosa. An elderly couple sharing a bottle of sparkling water in actual glass bottles. A teenager with a Coke. Another businessman with coffee. The cart came back past them. Lily thought surely Bridget would take their order. But instead, without a word, without even looking at them, Bridget reached over and slammed down a plastic cup of water on Vivienne's tray table. Not the glass bottles everyone else had received. Not on a napkin. Just a cheap plastic cup that you'd give a child, the kind with a lid, slammed down hard enough that water sloshed over the rim. Here. That's all she said. Here. Like she was throwing scraps to a dog. Lily looked at her mother's hands. They were trembling. Just slightly, barely noticeable, but Lily had spent 10 years learning to read her mother's emotions through the smallest gestures. Vivienne's hands only trembled like that when she was fighting to control herself, when she was swallowing down hurt and anger because she'd learned that showing those emotions made things worse for people like her. Lily wanted to say something. She wanted to call Bridget back and ask her why they were being treated differently from everyone else. But she looked at her mother's face, saw that carefully controlled expression and understood. Sometimes staying quiet was safer. Sometimes making a scene only made you the villain in everyone else's story. 15 minutes passed. The seatbelt sign had been off for a while. Passengers were moving about the cabin, stretching their legs, using the restrooms. Vivienne leaned over to Lily and spoke quietly. Sweetheart, I need to use the restroom. Can you help me? Of course, Mom. This was something they'd done thousands of times. Lily would stand, take her mother's arm and guide her. Vivienne would keep one hand on Lily's shoulder and use her other hand to trail along the seats or walls, orienting herself. They had it down to a science, smooth and efficient, requiring no help from anyone else. Lily stood up and moved into the aisle. Vivienne reached for her daughter's shoulder, beginning to rise from her seat. And then Bridget appeared out of nowhere like she'd been watching them, waiting for them to do something wrong. Ma'am, you can't just wander around the cabin. Vivienne paused, her hand still on Lily's shoulder. Her voice remained calm, patient. I'm going to the lavatory. My daughter is assisting me. Bridget crossed her arms, physically blocking the aisle. It's a safety hazard. You need to wait until we're at cruising altitude. There was a beat of silence. Lily could feel other passengers' eyes on them again. Vivienne's voice stayed level, but there was an edge to it now, the edge of someone who has explained themselves too many times. We are at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign is off. People have been moving around the cabin for the past 15 minutes. Bridget's voice took on that condescending tone that adults use when they think they're speaking to someone who doesn't understand basic concepts. I don't think you understand flight safety regulations. Let me pause here and let that sink in. Bridget just told a blind woman who had flown hundreds of times, who had probably spent more time in airplanes than Bridget had spent in her own living room, that she didn't understand flight safety. She said it loudly enough for surrounding passengers to hear. She said it with that tone that implied Vivienne was not just blind but stupid. Lily felt her mother's hand tighten on her shoulder. Not in fear. In restraint. In the effort it was taking not to respond the way she wanted to. Walter Finch, the businessman across the aisle, looked up from his newspaper. The seatbelt sign is off. I've seen half a dozen people use the restroom already. Bridget shot him a look that could have curdled milk but stepped aside with exaggerated reluctance. Fine. But make it quick. Lily guided her mother to the restroom, her heart pounding with humiliation and anger. Inside the tiny lavatory, while Vivienne used the facilities, Lily stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were burning with tears she refused to let fall. Her mother had built a company worth billions. Her mother had technology that was used by millions of people. Her mother was about to accept an award from the United Nations. And she was being treated like she was less than human by a flight attendant on a power trip. When they returned to their seats, Lily helped her mother get settled and then reached for the seat pocket to pull out Vivienne's screen reader device. This small electronic device was Vivienne's lifeline. It connected to her phone and tablet, reading text aloud, helping her navigate apps, allowing her to work and communicate independently. She never traveled without it. Lily's hand found nothing but in-flight magazines and a safety card. Mom, where's your reader? Vivienne's face changed. Not dramatically, but Lily saw the flash of concern. It should be in the seat pocket. I put it there before we went to the restroom. They searched. Lily pulled out everything from the seat pocket. She checked under the seat. She checked the floor around them. She checked Vivienne's purse. The device was gone. It was right here, Lily said, her voice rising with panic. That device cost thousands of dollars, but more than that, it was essential. Without it, Vivienne couldn't access half of her technology. It didn't just disappear. Lily pressed the call button. Bridget took her time coming over, and when she did, she didn't even try to hide her annoyance. What now? My mom's device is missing. It was in the seat pocket. Can you help us look for it? Bridget barely glanced at the seat. We're not responsible for passengers' belongings. You should have kept better track of it. It didn't just vanish, Lily insisted, her voice shaking. It was here before we went to the restroom. Can you please help us look? Bridget's irritation was morphing into something uglier. I have 157 passengers on this flight. I can't babysit your things because you're careless. And that's when Walter Finch put down his newspaper and spoke up. His voice was measured, calm, the voice of a man used to being listened to in boardrooms. I saw you take something from that seat pocket earlier when they were in the restroom. The cabin seemed to go quiet. Other passengers who had been pretending not to notice the drama suddenly looked up. They wanted to see what would happen next. Bridget's face flushed red. Excuse me? Are you accusing me of theft? Walter didn't back down. I'm saying what I saw. You reached into that seat pocket while they were gone and took something out. That's ridiculous. I was simply tidying the cabin. You specifically went to their row. You looked around to make sure no one was watching. And you took something from that seat pocket. More passengers were paying attention now. A woman 2 rows back had pulled out her phone. A teenager across the aisle had his camera pointed their direction. Bridget was aware of all of this, and it was making her desperate. She turned on Vivienne, and her voice rose loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Your device probably fell on the floor. Maybe if you weren't taking up first-class seats. She stopped herself, but the implication hung in the air like toxic gas. Everyone heard what she wasn't quite saying. Maybe if you weren't here where you don't belong. Maybe if people like you stayed in your place. Lily looked up at Bridget with tears streaming down her face now, her voice trembling with a rage she'd never felt before. What does that mean? What are you saying? And then Bridget said the quiet part out loud. I mean that some people abuse the system. You probably got these seats through some government assistance program, disability vouchers, some kind of charity that gives free flights to people who need help. The gasps around them were audible. The woman 2 rows back actually said, "Oh my God," out loud. Walter Finch looked like he'd been slapped. Even passengers in economy who had stood up to stretch and could hear what was happening looked shocked. Vivienne's voice cut through the cabin like a blade. It was deadly calm, the kind of calm that's more frightening than shouting. I purchased these tickets with my own money. And even if I hadn't, I have every right to be here. My disability doesn't make me less than. It doesn't make me a charity case. And it certainly doesn't give you the right to treat me like I'm less than human. But Bridget had gone too far now. She'd accused them publicly, and backing down would mean admitting she was wrong. So instead she doubled down. She emboldened herself with her own righteousness. I'm going to need to see your credit card. The one you used to purchase these tickets. I have authority as senior flight attendant to investigate potential fraud. The cabin was completely silent now. Everyone was watching. This wasn't just uncomfortable anymore. This was cruel. This was discrimination happening in real time at 30,000 feet with nowhere to escape. Vivienne's voice remained steady. You have no authority to demand that. You have no right to ask me to prove I belong here. As senior flight attendant, I absolutely have the authority to investigate potential fraud. Now show me your credit card or I'll have to ask the captain too. It's here. I found it. Lily's voice broke through the confrontation. She was holding up the screen reader device, her hand shaking. It was pushed behind the seat pocket. It fell back there. It was here the whole time. She held it up for everyone to see, proof that the device hadn't been stolen, that Bridget hadn't even bothered to look properly before accusing Vivienne of lying. Bridget snatched the device from Lily's hand and dropped it on Vivienne's tray table. See? Problem solved. Now please keep your voices down. You're disturbing the other passengers. She turned to leave, to just walk away like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just publicly humiliated a blind woman and her 10-year-old daughter in front of an entire airplane full of people. Vivienne's voice stopped her. I'd like to speak with the head flight attendant. Bridget turned back, and there was something almost triumphant in her expression. She was smirking, actually smirking. That's me, sweetheart. And that's when it happened. That's when Lily saw something she'd never seen before in her entire life. A single tear rolled down from beneath her mother's dark sunglasses, tracked slowly down her cheek, and dripped onto her navy blazer. Dr. Vivienne Cross, who had lost her sight and built an empire anyway. Who had been abandoned by her fiancé and succeeded anyway. Who had faced 1,000 obstacles and overcome every single one. Who had taught Lily that strength meant dignity, that power meant grace, that you responded to cruelty with composure. That woman was crying. If this story is making you as angry as I am, hit that subscribe button right now because what happens next is going to restore your faith in humanity. Or at least in one very brave little girl. Here's my question for you. If you witnessed something like this happening on a plane, would you speak up like Walter Finch did, or would you stay quiet? Be honest in the comments because I think this is something we all need to think about. Lily stared at that tear on her mother's face. Her brilliant, strong, unbreakable mother was crying because a flight attendant had stripped away her dignity piece by piece, humiliation by humiliation, until there was nothing left to do but cry. And something inside Lily broke. Or maybe it didn't break. Maybe something inside Lily was forged in that moment, tempered into something harder and stronger than it had been before. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. Her mother didn't try to stop her. Walter Finch leaned forward in his seat. Other passengers shifted to see what this little girl in a purple backpack with space pins was going to do. Lily's voice was clear and steady, carrying through the cabin with a conviction that belied her 10 years. You need to apologize to my mother. Right now. Bridget actually laughed. She laughed at a 10-year-old girl who was trying to defend her mother. Little girl, sit down before I have the captain. Lily pulled out her phone. Bridget's laughter died. Put that away. No filming on this aircraft. I'm not filming, Lily said, her fingers already dialing. I'm calling 911. What happened next would change everything. Lily's fingers moved across her phone screen with a determination that made Bridget Carmichael freeze mid-laugh. The flight attendant's expression shifted from amusement to alarm as she realized this 10-year-old wasn't bluffing. Give me that phone. Bridget lunged forward, her arm reaching across the seats. But Lily was small and quick. She ducked under Bridget's grasp, stepping backward into the aisle, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice came out clear and steady, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. I need police at gate 14. A flight attendant is hurting my mom. She's been discriminating against us because we're black and because my mom is blind. The cabin erupted. Walter Finch shot to his feet. Leave that child alone. A woman 2 rows back stood up, her phone already recording. I'm getting this. I'm recording everything. A man in row 4 shouted, what the hell is wrong with you? She's a kid. Bridget was trying to reach Lily again, but now there were passengers standing between them, creating a human barrier. The flight attendant's face had gone from red to nearly purple with rage and panic. Everyone sit down. This is a safety issue. That child is causing a disturbance and the only disturbance here is you. This came from Beverly Chin, a woman in her 40s wearing business casual attire, her voice sharp with authority. I've been recording this entire interaction. You accused them of fraud. You told them they got their tickets from a charity. You hid this woman's assistive device. You want to talk about disturbances? Let's talk about your behavior. More passengers were standing now, some to defend Lily, some just trying to see what was happening. The noise level had gone from the quiet murmur of a peaceful flight to the chaos of a protest. And through it all, Lily kept talking to the dispatcher, her voice shaking but clear. We're on flight 447 to New York. The flight attendant has been mean to my mom since we got on the plane. She made her cry. My mom never cries. Please send help. That's when the cockpit door opened and Trevor Walsh, the co-pilot, emerged. His kind eyes from earlier were now wide with shock as he took in the scene. A 10-year-old girl on the phone with emergency services. Passengers standing in the aisles. A flight attendant looking like she wanted to physically restrain a child. And in seat 2A, a blind woman sitting perfectly still, her face composed but that single tear still visible on her cheek. What is happening back here? Trevor's voice cut through the noise like a knife. Bridget spun toward him, and you could see her mentally scrambling to regain control of the narrative. Trevor, thank God. This woman and her daughter are causing a disturbance. The child called emergency services and is creating a safety hazard. I need you to. That's a damn lie. Walter Finch's voice boomed with the authority of a man who'd spent decades in boardrooms, a man who knew how to make himself heard. That flight attendant has been harassing them since they boarded. She questioned their tickets. She skipped them for beverage service. She tried to prevent this woman from using the restroom. She accused them of using government assistance to fraudulently obtain first-class seats. And when they couldn't find this woman's medical device, she suggested they didn't belong here because of their race and disability. Trevor's face went pale. He looked at Bridget and you could see him processing, remembering the tension he'd witnessed during boarding, the moment he'd asked if everything was all right and Bridget had dismissed him. Beverly Chin held up her phone. I have video evidence of the entire confrontation. The flight attendant accused this woman of ticket fraud and demanded to see her credit card. She called her sweetheart in a condescending manner. She refused to help search for the assistive device and suggested they were taking up first-class seats they didn't deserve. Other passengers began speaking over each other. I saw the whole thing. She treated them terribly from the moment they boarded. The flight attendant hid in the galley while they searched for the device. She was completely different with the rest of us, all smiles and courtesy. Trevor held up his hands for quiet. He looked at Lily, who was still on the phone with the dispatcher, then at Vivienne sitting motionless in her seat, then back at Bridget. When he spoke, his voice was harder than steel. Bridget, step back. Now. Trevor, you can't seriously be. I said step back. Return to the galley. You're done for this flight. Bridget's mouth fell open. You're believing them over me? I've been with this airline for 18 years. I'm the senior flight attendant. These people are clearly... These people, Trevor interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet, are passengers who paid for their seats and have been discriminated against. Get to the galley. Now. Before I have the captain remove you from duty entirely. Bridget looked around the cabin as if expecting someone to support her, to validate her actions, to acknowledge that she'd been doing her job. But all she saw were faces staring back at her with disgust, disappointment, and anger. Even the passengers who hadn't said anything, who had stayed in their seats trying not to get involved, were looking at her like she was something toxic. She opened her mouth to protest again, but Trevor was already turning away from her, kneeling down in the aisle next to Lily. Sweetheart, is that 911 on the phone? Lily nodded, tears streaming down her face now that an adult was finally taking her seriously. Can I talk to them? Trevor asked gently. Lily handed him the phone. Trevor identified himself to the dispatcher, confirmed that they were on an aircraft that hadn't yet left the gate, explained that there had been an incident of discrimination against a passenger, and requested police presence when they returned to the gate. He was calm, professional, treating the situation with the gravity it deserved. While Trevor was on the phone, something else happened. The cockpit door opened again, and this time Captain Raymond Shaw emerged. Captain Shaw was 55 years old with a salt and pepper beard and the kind of presence that made people automatically straighten their spines. He'd been flying for 3 decades, had logged over 20,000 flight hours, and had a reputation as one of the most respected pilots in the airline. He was also black, and the moment he stepped into that first-class cabin and saw Vivienne Cross sitting there with a tear on her face while passengers stood in the aisles in various states of outrage, he understood exactly what had happened. You could see it in his eyes. The recognition. The exhaustion of knowing that this still happened, that people who looked like him and like Vivienne and like little Lily still had to prove they belonged in spaces they'd paid to occupy. He took in the scene with one sweep of his experienced gaze. Trevor on the phone with emergency services. Lily standing there crying. Passengers holding up phones with video evidence. Bridget Carmichael pressed against the galley wall looking trapped and defensive. And Vivienne, sitting in seat 2A with her white cane beside her, her dark sunglasses unable to hide that track of moisture on her cheek. Captain Shaw moved through the aisle with quiet authority. When he reached Vivienne's seat, he did something that made several passengers gasp. He knelt down beside her, putting himself at her eye level even though she couldn't see him. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Raymond Shaw. I'm the pilot of this aircraft. Can you tell me what happened here today?" His voice was gentle but carried through the cabin. Every passenger within earshot went silent, straining to hear Vivienne's response. Vivienne turned her face toward the sound of his voice. When she spoke, her composure was returning, that strength that had built a billion-dollar company flowing back into her spine. But her voice still shook slightly. "Your flight attendant accused us of fraud. She questioned whether we had the right to sit in first class. She implied we'd obtained our tickets through government assistance or charity. She skipped us during beverage service and gave my daughter a plastic cup while serving glass to everyone else. She tried to prevent me from using the restroom, claiming I didn't understand safety regulations. When my assistive device went missing, she refused to help look for it and suggested that maybe we wouldn't be having these problems if we weren't taking up first-class seats. She demanded to see my credit card to prove I'd purchased our tickets. And she did all of this loudly enough to humiliate us in front of every passenger in this cabin." Captain Shaw listened to every word. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to minimize or explain away what had happened. He just listened with the attention and respect that Vivienne should have received from the beginning. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "I am deeply sorry. This is completely unacceptable. No passenger should ever be treated this way on my aircraft or any aircraft." He stood up and turned to face the cabin. His eyes found Bridget Carmichael, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "You're suspended pending investigation. Collect your things." Bridget's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Shock, disbelief, indignation, fear. "Captain, I've been with this airline for 18 years. I was just trying to maintain order. These passengers," Captain Shaw's voice cut through her excuses like a blade, "have done nothing wrong. You, on the other hand, have violated every principle of customer service, dignity, and basic human decency that this airline stands for. 18 years? Then you should know better. Now move." The finality in his voice left no room for argument. Trevor stepped forward and gently but firmly escorted Bridget toward the galley. She was sputtering, trying to explain herself, but nobody was listening anymore. The passengers watched her go with expressions ranging from satisfaction to contempt. Captain Shaw turned back to address the cabin. Several passengers were still standing in the aisles, phones out, some recording, some just bearing witness to what was happening. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. I want you to know that discrimination of any kind is absolutely not tolerated by this airline or by me personally. We will be delayed while we sort this situation out. I'm requesting airport police to meet us at the gate, and I will be filing a formal report about this incident." He pulled out his radio and spoke into it, his voice carrying through the cabin. "Tower, this is Shaw on Flight 447. We need to return to the gate. Requesting airport police presence for a flight attendant incident involving passenger discrimination." The response crackled back confirming his request. Walter Finch spoke up from his seat. "Captain, I want to provide a witness statement. I saw the entire incident from the beginning." Beverly Chin raised her hand. "I have video footage of the confrontation. I'm happy to provide it to the authorities." 3 other passengers volunteered statements. A teenage boy offered his video. An elderly woman said she'd heard everything and would testify to what the flight attendant had said. If you're watching this and your heart is pounding with the satisfaction of seeing justice start to happen, smash that subscribe button because we're not done yet. This story is about to take a turn that nobody, especially not Bridget Carmichael, saw coming. But let me ask you this. How many times do you think incidents like this happen when nobody has the courage to speak up? When there's no little girl brave enough to call 911? When passengers decide it's easier to look away? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Captain Shaw returned his attention to Vivienne and Lily. He knelt again, this time addressing both of them. Dr. Cross. Vivienne's head tilted slightly. You know my name? It's on the manifest. Dr. Vivienne Cross, CEO of Crosstech Innovations. And this must be Lily. Lily nodded, wiping tears from her face with the back of her hand. Lily, you did exactly the right thing by calling for help. That took tremendous courage. Your mother should be very proud of you. I am, Vivienne said softly, reaching out until her hand found Lily's. I'm so proud of you, baby. Captain Shaw continued, I want you both to know that what happened here today will be thoroughly investigated. The flight attendant in question will face serious consequences. And I will personally ensure that you reach New York safely and comfortably, even if I have to fly you there myself on a different aircraft. The plane was returning to the gate now, the engines reversing, the cabin filling with that mechanical sound of an aircraft in motion. Through the windows, passengers could see ground crew moving into position. And in the distance, the flash of blue and red lights. The police were already there. Bridget Carmichael was in the galley, and if you looked closely, you could see her hands shaking as she realized that this wasn't going to blow over. This wasn't going to be smoothed over with apologies and explanations. She had humiliated a passenger in front of witnesses, had been caught on video making discriminatory statements, and now the police were involved. Her 18 years with the airline were about to come to a very public end. But she still didn't know the half of it. Because while Captain Shaw knew who Vivienne Cross was from the passenger manifest, Bridget had no idea. She'd seen a blind black woman with a white cane and made assumptions. She'd seen a little girl in a purple backpack and dismissed them both as people who didn't belong in first class, people who were probably flying on charity or government assistance, people who needed to be put in their place. She had no idea that the woman she'd just humiliated was worth $2.3 billion. She had no idea that Vivienne Cross was a technology pioneer whose innovations had changed millions of lives. She had no idea that the woman crying in seat 2A was about to accept a United Nations humanitarian award. And she definitely had no idea what was about to happen when they opened those aircraft doors and the full weight of her actions came crashing down on her. The plane lurched to a stop at the gate. Through the windows, passengers could see police officers waiting on the jetway. Captain Shaw stood at the front of the first-class cabin, his hand on the door release. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated while we address this situation. He opened the door and two airport police officers stepped aboard. Officer Janet Rodriguez and Officer Marcus Hayes, both with serious expressions, both clearly briefed on what they were walking into. Bridget emerged from the galley one more time, and now her expression had shifted to something desperate. She was going to try to talk her way out of this. You could see it in her eyes, the calculation, the way she straightened her uniform and put on what she probably thought was a professional demeanor. Officers, thank goodness you're here. I had a situation with some passengers who became aggressive. The child fraudulently called emergency services and, Ma'am, we need you to stop talking right now. Officer Rodriguez's voice was firm but not unkind. We've been briefed on the situation, and we have multiple witnesses who contradict your version of events. Beverly Chin stood up, holding her phone. Officers, I have video evidence of everything. The flight attendant made racist and ableist remarks. She accused these passengers of fraud. She suggested they obtained their first-class seats through disability vouchers and didn't belong here. Walter Finch added, I witnessed the entire incident from boarding through the confrontation. I'll provide a full written statement. That flight attendant's behavior was discriminatory, unprofessional, and cruel. 4 other passengers spoke up, each offering to provide statements or evidence. The teenage boy with video footage. The elderly woman who'd heard every word. A businessman who'd watched the beverage service discrimination. A young mother who'd seen Bridget try to prevent Vivienne from using the restroom. Officer Hayes was taking notes, his expression growing more serious with each testimony. He turned to Vivienne. Ma'am, would you be willing to provide a statement about what occurred? Vivienne nodded. Yes. I want a full report filed. Not just for us but so this doesn't happen to anyone else. Officer Rodriguez pulled out a tablet to begin documenting statements. We'll need to review the video footage as well. Ma'am, she addressed Bridget, you're going to need to come with us to answer some questions. Bridget's face had gone from red to white. But I have a flight to work. I'm the senior flight attendant. I can't just. You're suspended, Captain Shaw reminded her quietly. You're no longer working this flight or any flight until the investigation is complete. Now collect your belongings and go with the officers. Trevor Walsh had already gathered Bridget's things from the galley. He handed her the small bag containing her purse and jacket, his expression carefully neutral but his disgust barely hidden. As officers began escorting Bridget off the aircraft, she passed by Vivienne's seat one more time. For just a second their paths crossed. Vivienne couldn't see Bridget's face, couldn't see the mixture of fear and resentment and dawning realization there. But Lily could. And Lily met Bridget's eyes with a steady gaze that said everything that needed to be said. You hurt my mother. You thought we didn't matter. You were wrong. Bridget looked away first. The cabin remained quiet as the officers escorted Bridget off the aircraft. Through the windows, passengers watched as she was led through the jetway, past ground crew and gate agents who had undoubtedly heard what happened, past other passengers waiting to board who pulled out their phones to record the flight attendant being removed by police. Her career, her reputation, her 18 years with the airline, all of it unraveling in real time. But the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because waiting in the jetway, alerted by the commotion and the police presence, was someone else. Someone who was about to make Bridget Carmichael's terrible day so much worse. Margaret Sutton, the airline's senior supervisor for the region, was boarding the aircraft with a tablet in hand and an expression that meant business. And she was about to drop a revelation that would leave everyone speechless. Officer Rodriguez was still taking statements when footsteps echoed through the jetway. Sharp, purposeful footsteps that made Captain Shaw look up from where he'd been standing near Vivienne's seat. A woman in her 50s entered the aircraft, her professional attire immaculate, her expression a mixture of concern and barely contained fury. She carried a tablet and had the air of someone who made decisions that mattered. Margaret Sutton, the airline's senior regional supervisor, had been alerted to the police presence and had rushed from her office in the terminal. She'd been briefed on the basics: discrimination complaint, passenger altercation, flight attendant suspension. But she was here to assess the situation personally and ensure the airline's response was appropriate. She nodded to Captain Shaw, acknowledged the police officers, and then her eyes swept the first-class cabin. They landed on Vivienne and Lily in seats 2A and 2B. Margaret's face softened immediately when she saw them, saw the tear tracks still visible on Lily's face, saw the way Vivienne sat with that careful composure that comes from years of controlling your reactions in public. Dr. Cross, I cannot express how mortified. Margaret stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes went wide. She looked down at her tablet, then back at Vivienne, then over at Captain Shaw. Wait, did you say Dr. Cross? Dr. Vivienne Cross. Captain Shaw nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips because he'd been waiting for this moment. That's what her boarding pass says. Dr. Vivienne Cross and her daughter Lily. Margaret's face went through a transformation. The professional concern morphed into something closer to horror. The tablet nearly slipped from her hands. She looked at Vivienne again, really looked at her this time, and you could see recognition dawning like a sunrise she desperately didn't want to see. Dr. Cross, Margaret's voice had gone quiet, almost reverent with dread. Dr. Vivienne Cross, the CEO of Cross Tech Innovations? Vivienne turned her face toward Margaret's voice. Yes. The cabin went completely silent. Passengers who had been gathering their things or checking their phones all stopped. Officer Rodriguez paused in her note-taking. Even Bridget, who had been standing near the galley with Officer Hayes, went absolutely still. Margaret looked like someone had just told her the building was on fire. Dr. Cross, you're on our airline's board of accessibility advisors. You personally consulted on our disability accommodations program. You helped us develop our training protocols for assisting blind and visually impaired passengers. Walter Finch let out a low whistle. Beverly Chen's eyes went wide. Other passengers were looking at each other, at Vivienne, at Bridget, putting the pieces together. Lily's small voice cut through the silence. My mom helps airlines treat people better. Margaret nodded, and there were actually tears forming in her eyes now. Dr. Cross has donated millions of dollars to aviation accessibility initiatives. She's partnered with us on pilot programs for improved assistive technology at airports. She's literally the reason this airline has a comprehensive blind passenger support program. She wrote half of our training manual on disability awareness. The irony was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Bridget Carmichael had spent the entire flight discriminating against, humiliating, and abusing a woman who had dedicated years of her life and millions of her own money to making sure blind passengers would be treated with dignity and respect on airlines. Including this airline. She'd tormented the very person who had created the programs designed to prevent exactly this kind of treatment. Vivienne's voice was quiet, but it carried through the cabin with the weight of profound disappointment. Which clearly needs more work. 4 words. That's all it took. 4 words that contained volumes about how completely the system had failed, about how all the training and protocols and good intentions meant nothing when the people implementing them carried prejudice in their hearts. Bridget's face had drained of all color. She looked like she was going to be sick. She'd probably been picturing a slap on the wrist, maybe a brief suspension, perhaps some mandatory retraining. She'd been rationalizing her behavior, telling herself she'd just been doing her job, maintaining standards, nothing discriminatory about wanting to verify tickets. But now she understood. She'd publicly humiliated one of the most influential people in aviation accessibility. She'd discriminated against a woman who was literally on the airline's advisory board. She'd made cry a person who had donated millions to make air travel better for people like her. Her career wasn't just over. It was obliterated. Margaret turned to face Bridget, and her expression was colder than the air at 30,000 feet. You're terminated. Effective immediately. But Bridget started, her voice desperate now. I've been with this airline for 18 years. I have seniority. I deserve a hearing, a chance to explain. You had 18 years to learn how to treat people with dignity, Margaret cut her off. You had access to training that Dr. Cross herself helped develop. You knew our policies on discrimination. And you chose to violate every single one of them. There will be a formal investigation, but as of this moment, you no longer work for this airline. Officers, please escort her off the premises. Bridget looked around wildly as if someone might come to her defense, might acknowledge that she'd just been doing her job, that these passengers had been the problem, not her. But every face that looked back at her held nothing but disgust. Officer Hayes took her gently but firmly by the arm. Ma'am, let's go. As they led her through the aircraft door, Bridget passed by Vivienne one last time. She opened her mouth as if to say something, an apology, an excuse, a justification, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? How do you apologize for stripping away someone's dignity, for treating them as less than human, for making assumptions based on nothing but prejudice? Vivienne didn't turn her head. She didn't acknowledge Bridget's presence. She just sat there with quiet dignity, her hand clasped in Lily's, waiting for this nightmare to finally be over. The cabin door closed behind Bridget and the officers. Through the windows, passengers watched as she was escorted through the terminal, her career, her reputation, her livelihood disintegrating with every step. Margaret remained on board. She crouched down beside Vivienne's seat, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with genuine emotion. Dr. Cross, I don't know how to adequately apologize for what you and your daughter experienced today. This is the exact opposite of everything we've worked to build, everything you've helped us create. I am personally ashamed and horrified. Vivienne was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, and her words were measured, thoughtful. Margaret, I don't want apologies. I want systemic change. I want to know that my experience today is going to result in better training, better oversight, better accountability. I want to know that the next blind mother traveling with her child won't have to go through this. Because right now, all your protocols and training materials and advisory boards mean nothing if the people working your flights can still look at someone like me and decide I don't belong. You have my word, Margaret said. I will personally oversee a complete review of our practices. We'll implement mandatory implicit bias training for all staff. We'll create better reporting mechanisms. You'll do more than that, Vivienne interrupted gently. You'll let me help. Because this isn't just about one bad flight attendant. This is about a culture that allowed her to feel comfortable treating us this way. This is about systems that still, in 2025, make people with disabilities prove they deserve basic respect. Margaret nodded emphatically. Whatever you need. Whatever resources, whatever access, whatever changes you recommend. Consider it done. Captain Shaw stepped forward. Dr. Cross, I need to ask. Do you want to continue with this flight, or would you prefer to take a later one? I understand if you'd rather not fly with us today after what you've been through. Lily looked up at her mother, waiting for her decision. Vivienne smiled for the first time since the ordeal began. It was a small smile, tired but genuine. No. We have an award ceremony to attend in New York. We're not letting this delay our plans. Let's go. Margaret squeezed Vivienne's hand gently before standing. Your tickets will be upgraded to our premier class on all future flights indefinitely. Not as compensation, there's no compensation that can undo this, but as a small gesture of our commitment to earning back your trust. I don't want special treatment, Vivienne said. I just want the treatment everyone deserves. Understood. But please accept it anyway. Margaret departed, but not before promising to have her assistant call Vivienne's office to schedule meetings about the policy reviews. As she left, Captain Shaw returned to the cockpit to prepare for departure, but not before stopping by Vivienne's seat one more time. It would be my honor to fly you to New York, Dr. Cross. Thank you, Captain Shaw. The cabin crew had changed. Trevor Walsh had stepped in as the temporary senior flight attendant, and he'd been joined by 2 other crew members who'd been briefed on what happened and were determined to make the rest of this flight as comfortable as possible. Before takeoff, as passengers settled back into their seats, Captain Shaw's voice came over the intercom. His words were broadcast not just to first class but to the entire aircraft, to every passenger in every row. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Before we depart, I want to personally address the incident that occurred in our first-class cabin. A member of our flight crew engaged in discriminatory behavior toward passengers Dr. Vivienne Cross and her daughter Lily. This behavior was completely unacceptable and contrary to every value this airline stands for. That crew member has been terminated and removed from the aircraft. I want to make something absolutely clear. This airline has zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind. Zero. Whether based on race, disability, gender, religion, or any other characteristic, discrimination will not be tolerated on my aircraft or any aircraft in our fleet. He paused, and when he continued, there was a warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before. We are honored today to have Dr. Vivienne Cross aboard. For those who don't know, Dr. Cross is the founder and CEO of CrossTech Innovations, a pioneer in accessibility technology who has changed millions of lives through her work. She's also a member of our airline's advisory board for accessibility, and she has personally helped shape the programs we use to serve passengers with disabilities. Her presence on this flight is a reminder that dignity and respect are not negotiable. They are not privileges to be earned. They are rights that every human being possesses from the moment they step onto this aircraft. Applause began in first class and rippled backward through the cabin. It started with Walter Finch, who stood and clapped loudly. Beverly Chin joined in. Within seconds, passengers throughout the entire plane were applauding. Some were standing. The sound was thunderous, cathartic, a collective release of tension and a celebration of justice. Lily looked at her mother with tears streaming down her face again, but these were different tears. These were tears of pride and relief and vindication. Vivienne lifted her hand in a small wave of acknowledgement, and the applause grew even louder. As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, something else happened. An elderly white woman from economy class made her way forward. She was probably in her 70s with soft white curls and kind eyes. A flight attendant tried to remind her to stay in her seat, but she waved him off. I heard what happened, she said when she reached Lily's seat. She held out a cookie wrapped in a napkin, the kind the airline served with coffee. You're very brave, sweetheart. Don't you ever let anyone tell you different. What you did today. Standing up for your mama like that? That's real courage. Lily took the cookie with trembling hands. Thank you. The elderly woman looked at Vivienne. And you, dear. You raised a remarkable daughter. The world needs more children like her. More people like both of you. She patted Lily's hand once more and then made her way back to economy, ignoring the flight attendant's gentle scolding about seatbelts. The flight took off smoothly. As the plane climbed through the clouds, leaving Los Angeles behind, the cabin settled into a peaceful quiet that was the exact opposite of the chaos from before. Trevor and the other flight attendants treated Vivienne and Lily with the respect they should have received from the beginning, not overly solicitous, not making a fuss, just treating them like valued passengers. Like human beings. They served beverages in real glasses. They checked in to see if they needed anything. They smiled warmly and meant it. And most importantly, they treated them exactly the same way they treated every other passenger in first class. Lily sat by the window looking out at the clouds. They were flying above the weather now, in that space where the sky is impossibly blue and the clouds below look like mountains made of cotton. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold. She turned to her mother. Mom? What does justice look like? Vivienne considered the question. She reached up and removed her dark sunglasses, revealing eyes that didn't focus on anything but somehow seemed to see everything. She turned her face toward Lily's voice. It looks like a little girl who refused to be silent when she saw something wrong. It looks like strangers on an airplane who chose to stand up and bear witness rather than look away. It looks like a captain who believed passengers over a long-time employee. It looks like consequences for people who abuse their power. She paused, then reached out and found Lily's hand. Mostly it looks like you, baby. Justice looks like courage. And today you were the bravest person I know. Lily leaned her head on her mother's shoulder, the way she'd done since she was small. I was scared. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. They sat like that for a long moment, mother and daughter, hands clasped, flying toward New York and toward a ceremony where Vivienne would accept an award for her humanitarian work. But the real award, the real victory was happening right here in this moment. A little girl learning that her voice mattered. A mother seeing her daughter become the kind of person who stands up for what's right. A cabin full of strangers who had witnessed injustice and refused to be silent. Vivienne spoke again, so quietly that only Lily could hear. And justice looks like making sure the next blind mother and her child never have to go through what we went through today. That's what I'm going to do. That's what this flight, as terrible as it was, is going to lead to. If you've made it to the end of this story and you're feeling inspired by Lily's courage, hit that subscribe button right now. Because stories like this need to be told. Acts of bravery need to be celebrated. And we need to keep having these conversations about dignity, respect, and standing up for what's right. And here's my question for you. What's one time in your life when you stood up for someone who was being treated unfairly? Or what's one time you wish you had? Share your story in the comments because I believe that every act of courage, no matter how small, creates ripples that can change the world. 3 months after that flight, Dr. Vivienne Cross stood at a press conference and announced the launch of the Invisible No More initiative. It was a comprehensive program that would train 10,000 airline staff members across multiple carriers on disability awareness, implicit bias, and accessibility best practices. She partnered with 5 major airlines, including the one where Bridget Carmichael had worked. The training wasn't optional. It wasn't a video people could watch and click through without paying attention. It was intensive, hands-on, and included testimonials from people with disabilities about their experiences in air travel. The program included surprise audits, where passengers with disabilities would fly and report on their treatment. It included a hotline for reporting discrimination. It included accountability measures that meant flight attendants who engaged in discriminatory behavior would face real consequences, not just a slap on the wrist. Vivienne donated $15 million of her own money to launch the program. But more than that, she donated her time, her expertise, her story. She spoke at training sessions. She met with airline executives. She pushed for policy changes at the federal level. And Lily? That 10-year-old girl who had stood in an airplane aisle with a phone in her hand and refused to let her mother be treated as less than? She started a blog called Brave Voices. She wrote about her experience on the flight and the story went viral. Within a week, she had 100,000 followers. Within a month, 500,000. Young people from around the world shared their own stories of standing up to injustice. Adults wrote to thank Lily for reminding them that courage doesn't have an age requirement. People with disabilities shared their experiences and found a community that listened and believed them. Lily became a youth advocate, speaking at schools and conferences. She was interviewed on news programs. She met with legislators about disability rights. And through it all, her mother was beside her, guiding her, supporting her, but also letting her lead. Because Vivienne understood that sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones we least expect. Sometimes justice comes from the bravest hearts. And sometimes those hearts belong to children who simply know, with absolute clarity, the difference between right and wrong. As for Bridget Carmichael, she was banned from working in aviation. The video footage from the flight had been provided to multiple airlines, and she found herself unhireable in the industry where she'd worked for 18 years. She tried to fight it, hired a lawyer, claimed she was being unfairly targeted. But when you're caught on video making discriminatory statements to a passenger, when multiple witnesses corroborate a pattern of bias, when you've humiliated someone on an airline's advisory board, there's not much a lawyer can do. She became a cautionary tale. In the training sessions Vivienne developed, Bridget's actions were used as an example of exactly what not to do, how bias and prejudice can destroy not just your career but the lives and dignity of the people you're supposed to serve. The final image from this story is simple but powerful. It's of Vivienne and Lily on another airplane, months later, flying to yet another event where they would speak about accessibility and justice and courage. They're sitting in seats 2A and 2B again, but this time the flight attendant greets them with genuine warmth. This time there are no questions about their tickets, no suspicions, no discrimination. This time they're served the same as everyone else, treated with the respect that should have been theirs from the beginning. Lily is describing the sunset to her mother through the airplane window. The sky is on fire with orange and pink. The clouds are edged in gold. And below them, the world is spinning, slowly changing, one brave voice at a time. "It's beautiful, Mom," Lily says. "Tell me more," Vivienne responds, smiling. And as they fly toward whatever comes next, toward more awards and more advocacy and more work to make the world better, one thing is absolutely certain: they will never be silent. They will never accept being treated as less than. And they will make sure that the next blind mother, the next child, the next person who faces discrimination has a voice, has support, has justice. Because that's what this story is really about. Not just one flight attendant who got fired or one bad experience that got resolved. It's about the ongoing fight for dignity. It's about systems that need changing and cultures that need transforming. It's about the courage to call 911 when you're 10 years old because you see your mother crying. It's about strangers who stand up as witnesses instead of looking away. It's about consequences for cruelty and rewards for bravery. It's about love and protection and the fierce determination of a little girl in a purple backpack with space pins who looked at injustice and said, "Not today, not to my mother, not while I have breath in my body and a phone in my hand." That's justice. That's courage. That's what it means to refuse to be invisible. And that's where our story ends, not with an ending at all, but with a beginning. The beginning of change. The beginning of accountability. The beginning of a world where people like Vivienne and Lily don't have to fight so hard just to be treated with basic human dignity. A world where every person, regardless of how they look or what disabilities they have or where they come from, can board an airplane and know they belong there. Because they do. We all do. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for caring. And if you take nothing else away from this, take this: be like Lily. Stand up. Speak out. Refuse to be silent in the face of injustice. Because you never know when your voice might be the one that changes everything.